The slap came without warning. It cracked across the first-class cabin like a gunshot. Sharp, stunning, loud enough to turn every head in row 1 through 6. Silverware paused midair, eyebrows lifted. A baby up in economy started to cry. 12-year-old Simone Caldwell sat frozen, her cheek blooming red, her body stiff against the plush leather seat. She didn't make a sound, didn't cry, didn't move, just stared forward, stunned. Her sister Sierra, age 13, jolted. "What?" "I said, sit properly," snapped the flight attendant, white, tight-bunned, and already stepping back as if what she'd done was routine discipline. Her name tag read Brenda C. Her voice dripped with authority. She kicked the seat. Brenda added to no one in particular. "Children need to learn how to behave in premium cabins." Simone hadn't kicked anything. She'd tucked her feet up under her knees because the cold air was making her ankles numb. She hadn't said a word since boarding. Sierra looked to their grandmother, sitting in 3A. Odessa Caldwell didn't say a word. She calmly reached into her structured gray tote, pulled out a soft travel blanket, and gently unfolded it across Simone's lap. Then, with a quiet click, she unsnapped the leather strap of a small, aged notebook, removed a slim pen, and began to write. Time code: 3:12 p.m. Pattern confirmed. Trigger condition met. No further verbal escalation required. She flipped the page, tore it out with care, and tucked it beneath her phone. Her expression didn't change. Behind them, the whispers started. She actually slapped her. Are they going to say anything? Where are the parents? We paid thousands for these seats and this is what we get? No one stood up. No one intervened. Brenda cleared her throat and looked directly at Odessa. Is there a problem here, ma'am? Odessa looked up, her voice cool. None at all. Brenda gave a tight-lipped smile and turned away. Sierra leaned in, her voice shaking. Grandma, she hit Simone. You saw that, right? You heard what she said, like we don't belong here. I heard, and you're just gonna let that go. Odessa folded her notebook slowly. I didn't say that. Simone sat rigid, the blanket now clutched in her fists. Her eyes were glossy, but she refused to let the tears fall. Sierra's hands trembled with fury. We should call Dad, Sierra whispered. Right now. I don't care if he's in a meeting. Not yet, Odessa said, eyes focused out the window. Not yet. This is a whole emergency. Odessa finally turned to her. Do you trust me? Sierra hesitated, then nodded. Good. Then sit tall, chin up. She already slapped your sister. Don't let her see she took your dignity too. And that was the end of it. For now. Tell us where you're watching from. And what would you do if your granddaughter got slapped in first class, in front of the entire cabin? The rest of the flight passed in a kind of suspended silence. Passengers avoided eye contact. The woman across the aisle shifted her Hermes scarf and turned her shoulder toward the window. The man next to her buried himself in a copy of The Economist. No one asked Simone if she was okay. No one offered an apology. When drink service rolled around, Brenda skipped row 3 entirely. Odessa didn't seem to mind. She sat poised, hands folded over the notebook now closed tight on her tray table. From time to time, she glanced at her phone, not to text or scroll, but to watch the blinking green indicator on an encrypted app at the bottom of her home screen. It had turned yellow. Soon it would turn red. Sierra stared at her grandmother. She didn't understand what any of this meant, but she'd seen that look before. Odessa Caldwell wasn't just a retired school teacher or someone's sweet, quiet Nana. She had another name once, one not used in public, one attached to boardrooms and policy briefings and discreet power. Back home in Bethesda, there were entire drawers in the guest room that Sierra and Simone weren't allowed to open. Odessa had a study with 2 locks and a direct line to someone named only Marcel, a call she never made until now. At 3:26 p.m., Odessa adjusted her scarf, checked her seatbelt, and tapped a single line on her phone. Activate Ledger Protocol 921C. The screen blinked once, then went black. They landed at San Francisco International in silence. No one applauded. No one made eye contact. Brenda stood stiffly at the front, thanking passengers as they disembarked, avoiding row 3 entirely. As Odessa, Sierra, and Simone stepped onto the jet bridge, a man in a charcoal suit stood waiting. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. He handed Odessa an envelope. Inside, a printed terminal code, a confirmation ID, and a response line that read, "Black flag clause acknowledged. Freeze initiated. Estimated impact, 940,000. Odessa tucked it into her purse like a grocery list. Sierra finally whispered, "Grandma, what did you do?" Odessa placed a hand on each girl's back and gently guided them forward. "I didn't do anything." She smiled faintly. "I just let the system catch up with itself." By the time they reached baggage claim, the ripple had already begun. Inside Terminal G, Odessa, Sierra, and Simone walked in silence, surrounded by the usual hum of travelers and echoing luggage wheels. The noise around them felt oddly distant, like it was happening in another world. Sierra kept glancing at her phone. "Still nothing in the news," she whispered. "It wouldn't be news," Odessa replied, calmly adjusting her gloves. "Not yet." Simone still hadn't spoken since the slap. She trailed just behind them, her posture guarded, arms crossed over her stomach like she was trying to shrink out of view. Odessa didn't force a conversation. She knew what that silence meant. Shame worked its way into children differently. It didn't just bruise the skin. It folded itself into their sense of worth, of belonging. Not this time. 30 minutes earlier in Manhattan, thousands of miles away, a quiet storm had started. A red flag alert blinked on the ethics risk dashboard at the New York headquarters of Fair Sky Ledger. A young analyst named Malik Osei sat up straight, nearly spilling his coffee. He leaned forward to double-check the origin tag. Protocol 921C, triggered by Caldwell O. Priority immediate. He barely had time to process before the director of ethics response, Evan Cho, stepped into the room. "She pulled it," Evan asked. "Confirmed. From in-flight." Evan didn't blink. "Get legal. Initiate Ledger lockdown for all 5 affiliates. Sky North first." Within 5 minutes, an invisible cascade began. Ethics scores dropped. 5 airlines, including Sky North, saw their compliance ratings fall beneath the sustainability benchmark. That triggered an automatic freeze of multi-million across multiple ESG credit lines. 2 international investment consortia delisted the affected airlines. Insurance partners requested emergency reevaluations, and none of the airlines saw it coming. All because of one clause, hidden deep in the framework of the Fair Sky Ledger. A clause no one ever believed would be used, until now. Back in San Francisco, Odessa calmly checked her phone. A small green badge glowed faintly. Freeze active, monitoring phase. She placed the device back into her coat pocket and looked toward her granddaughters. Sierra had been watching her. She didn't say anything, but the look on her face was different now. More curious than confused. Like she was beginning to understand there was more to her grandmother than cardigans and peppermint tea. Odessa gave a small nod. "You both asked why I didn't yell," she said quietly. "Why I didn't confront that woman in the aisle." Simone looked up for the first time since they landed. Sierra stayed close. Odessa continued. "Because when you know what system you're inside of, and you helped build it, you don't have to yell, you just have to signal it." They made their way to the car, and Sierra still looked unsure. "So that phone? That tap you did on the plane? What exactly did it do?" "It began a correction," Odessa said. "A long time coming." The ride to their hotel, the Grantham, was quiet but smooth. As the car pulled up to the entrance, a doorman stepped forward and tipped his hat. "Welcome back, Ms. Caldwell," he said warmly. Sierra blinked. "Wait, you've been here before?" "Many times," Odessa replied, as if it weren't worth noting. "I used to attend ethics board meetings nearby." Simone squinted. "You were on the board?" Odessa gave a gentle chuckle. "No, baby, I wrote the board." Inside Sky North's corporate tower, chaos was unfolding. CEO Craig Halden was in his corner office, red-faced and furious. He stood over a young legal officer who was reading from a printed memo with shaking hands. "This can't be real," Craig said. "They can't just freeze funding." "They can," the lawyer said. "They did." Craig stormed to his screen. "Who the hell is behind this?" The legal officer clicked into the metadata on the protocol. A name popped up. Odessa Caldwell. Beneath it, her previous title, Senior Ethics Risk Director, Global Investment Council, founder of the Passenger Equity Framework, protocol architect of the very system Sky North had signed into 3 years ago to attract sustainable investors. "She wrote the system," the lawyer muttered, stunned. "She's not just a passenger. She's the root authority." Craig stared at the screen, cold sweat rising on the back of his neck. "So she can shut it all down?" She already did. At the Grantham, Odessa took her tea quietly in the lounge while Sierra paced nearby. "You really made that thing? The whole fair sky system?" Sierra asked. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" Odessa looked up. "Because I didn't build it to talk about. I built it to protect people who don't always get to sit in first class without someone asking why they're there." Simone leaned forward, finally finding her voice. "So what happens now?" Odessa smiled, small and certain. "Now the industry scrambles to explain why their ethics score suddenly dropped. Investors start calling, journalists sniff around, and the FAA quietly reopens the passenger equity framework they buried 3 years ago." "You're going to go public with this?" Sierra asked. "No," Odessa said. "That's not necessary. The consequence is already moving. And besides," she picked up her notebook, "real correction doesn't need headlines. It just needs pressure in the right places." That same evening, 3,000 miles away in D.C., the FAA received an encrypted draft of a 54-page proposal, an old document revived from their archives. Title: Passenger Equity Framework, Draft Review. Author: Goodwell O. It had been shelved, dismissed as too ambitious, too radical. Now it had teeth, and the industry was listening. Back in her room, Odessa stood on the balcony as the city lights flickered to life. Her granddaughters were asleep in the suite behind her. She held her notebook, turned to a new page, and wrote in her careful hand, "One strike, one signal, and the system reboots. This time, they'll remember the silence." She tore out the page, folded it neatly, and placed it inside the leather folder labeled Passenger Equity, Active Case, Caldwell. Tomorrow, she knew, there would be calls. But tonight, there was peace, and that was enough. The next morning, Odessa was already up before the sun. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed, her notebook open in her lap, steam rising gently from a cup of jasmine tea beside her. Sierra and Simone were still asleep, curled up under the soft white blankets in the other room. The silence gave her space to think, but it wouldn't last long. She flipped a page and read over her notes from the night before. Every line was purposeful, every phrase sharp like a scalpel. Odessa had been in too many boardrooms to leave anything vague, especially now. Her phone buzzed. It wasn't a text or call. It was a system ping from Fairsky's internal alert chain, the kind that only final note authorities received. She tapped to open it. Subject: Emergency Ethics Rating Deviation Review. Affected. Sky North Airline status. Preliminary suspension. Pending multi-sector investigation authority source. Caldwell. Oh, the investigation had started. She exhaled slowly, not out of relief, but because she knew exactly what came next. Across town, Sierra and Simone were sitting on the hotel room couch, each with a bowl of cereal in their lap. The morning news was playing on mute on the flat-screen TV, but the headlines were loud enough. ESG meltdown. 940 LM frozen as Sky North Ethics score crashes overnight. Anonymous passenger triggers systemic audit. Sources say high-level insider behind it. Sierra squinted. They don't even know it's you. Odessa walked out from the bedroom, tying her silk robe. They will, she said simply. Are you going to tell them? Duh. Odessa replied. I'm going to show them. Later that morning, a car picked them up from the hotel. Odessa had a meeting at the Bayview Institute, an old policy think tank tucked into the hills above San Francisco. She'd spoken there before, but today's meeting wasn't scheduled. She was calling it herself. The director, Martin Shu, greeted her at the front desk. Odessa, he said, slightly breathless. I figured you'd be coming. He led her to a small conference room with glass walls. I've already cleared the schedule. You'll have total discretion over what gets shared. This thing you started, it's gone nuclear. Odessa sat down, placed her leather folder on the table, and opened it calmly. I didn't start it, she said. Barbara Reynolds did when she slapped my granddaughter. All I did was answer the system I built. Martin leaned in. We've had calls from FAA, from the EU Transport Authority, even 2 UN observers. You just triggered a global shift. Odessa nodded. Good. Let's give it shape. Back at Sky North's headquarters, the C-suite was melting down. Shut it down, Craig Heldon barked. I don't care if you have to bribe someone. Get this ledger nonsense reversed. His chief legal officer leaned against the wall, arms folded. You still don't get it. You signed your soul to her system when you begged for that green rating 2 years ago. There's no shutting it down. This isn't just about Fairsky. It's about every bank, insurer, and port that uses their compliance framework. So we're blacklisted? You're ethically insolvent. Craig turned to the window, staring out at the skyline. Then we need to find her, whoever she is. The lawyer was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled a printed document from his briefcase. She's not hard to find, he said. Her name's on every line of this protocol. Craig read the name aloud. Odessa Caldwell. He blinked, then paused. Wait, that name sounds familiar. The lawyer nodded. She's the same woman who blocked the NovaJet merger in 2019 because of unethical crew policies. She's been shaping policy behind the scenes for 2 decades. Craig dropped the paper. Oh God, he muttered. We slapped the ethics czar's grandkids. Back in San Francisco, Odessa stood at a podium in the Bayview Institute's small auditorium. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't gesture wildly. She didn't have to. Every word hit like a bell. When a black child is slapped in first class and no one intervenes, that's not just rudeness. That's infrastructure, she said. It's the consequence of design, of unchecked power that thinks seats are owned by faces, not tickets. People nodded. Some clapped. But Odessa wasn't there for applause. She clicked her remote and changed the slide on the screen behind her. The Passenger Equity Framework Full Activation Plan. A 4-phase roadmap that integrated ethics compliance into the very backbone of airline operation. Real-time behavior monitoring, crew and passenger. Ethics score, integration with insurance and credit access. Flight. Eligibility, restrictions for low-score operators. Public disclosure of violations and corrective measures. She turned back to the room. This isn't a threat, she said calmly. It's an overdue upgrade. The industry can either adapt or get left on the tarmac. 1 hour later, video clips from the talk began circulating online. The name Odessa Caldwell started trending. Within 3 hours, 3 investor coalitions began divesting from Sky North. One of them, Horizon Capital, published a brief. We were made aware that the ethics compliance failure stemmed from the mistreatment of 2 young passengers of color. We are redirecting all aviation investments to airlines that meet the passenger equity baseline. Back in the hotel suite, Sierra watched the news with wide eyes. They know it's you now. Odessa sat down beside her. They know who I am, she said, sipping her tea. But more importantly, they know what comes next. Simone, sitting cross-legged on the floor, whispered, Are they scared? Odessa didn't answer immediately. Then, they should be. That evening, a special closed-door meeting was convened at FAA headquarters. 4 senior administrators sat around a long oak table. One of them, a woman named Darla Reyes, held up her tablet. This is the problem, she said. She's not just a whistleblower. She's the engineer. She has built-in authority, and she has the public's trust. Another official asked, Do we fight this or follow her lead? Darla looked out the window, then back at her tablet. She gave us the framework 3 years ago, she said. We ignored it. Now she's proving we can't. By the end of the night, 3 countries had signaled interest in adopting parts of Odessa's framework. The dominoes were falling. And Odessa? She was back on the balcony, staring into the dark sky. Sierra walked up beside her, holding her phone. Grandma, she said softly, there's a video going viral. Some random passenger filmed the slap. It's out now. People are mad. Odessa nodded, watching the moonlight cut across the city skyline. Good, she said. Let them be. She didn't need to go viral. But the truth? That needed to fly. The newsroom at Channel 6 wasn't built for chaos. But by 10:04 a.m., chaos had taken a seat and poured itself coffee. Okay, who is she? Is the slap video real? Wait, $940 million. Froze. What the hell is the Fair Sky Ledger? Producers darted between desks like bees in a storm, phones glued to their ears. They weren't chasing a story. The story was chasing them. In a corner booth near the back, Selena Torres, the network's senior ethics correspondent, stared at a grainy still image pulled from the viral video. 2 young black girls in first class, one flinching, one reaching toward her sister, and a flight attendant mid-slap, her hand blurred from motion. Selena narrowed her eyes at the timestamp. 07:49 a.m. Gate 32A. Sky North, Flight 1182. She didn't need confirmation. She recognized the posture in that hand. It was the same airline whose CEO once told her off record, "These ESG scores are a fad. What matters is seat fill." Well, now the seats were empty. She typed 3 words into a search bar. Odessa Caldwell Ethics. And there it was. A decade of policy drafts. Closed-door testimony before Senate committees. Founding chair of the Ethics Viability Index. Whispers of a system used quietly across 7 banks and 2 international lending boards. Selena exhaled. We slapped the woman who writes the rules. 10 minutes later, her segment aired live. Sources now confirm the woman behind the viral airline ethics freeze is Odessa Caldwell, a former ethics risk director with control authority over the Fair Sky Ledger, a platform that determines credit eligibility for multi-billion-dollar transportation investments. Her granddaughters were the victims in the now infamous first-class incident, and the consequences were already seeing them. The clip went global in under 30 minutes. Hashtags exploded. He wrote the rules. Odessa Caldwell. North exposed. Meanwhile, in a plush boardroom, 5 floors above Sky North's corporate lobby, CEO Craig Holden sat pale, surrounded by legal counsel and crisis PR. "Get her on the phone," he barked. "We need to apologize. Issue a press statement. Offer her a settlement." His general counsel gave him a look. "Craig, she doesn't want your apology. Then what the hell does she want? She wants the entire industry to change." Silence. One junior VP whispered, "She can't actually freeze the banks, right?" Everyone turned. "She didn't freeze." "The general counsel said." "She froze the rating that underwrites the banks. The system reacted automatically. That's what happens when the ethics score drops below 42.3. The room went quiet again. Craig stood up, pacing. "So what now?" His legal advisor just said, "Now we wait for her to move again." Odessa didn't go on TV. She didn't make a statement. She simply uploaded a document. It was a 27-page white paper titled The Passenger Equity Framework, Emergency Implementation Protocol. No bold fonts, no drama, just policy. But within 4 hours, 6 domestic airlines received a notification that unless they signed acknowledgement of the framework's principles, their access to Fair Sky-linked credit facilities would be suspended within 14 business days. By 5 p.m., 3 of them signed. Sky North refused. They issued a press release that read, "We are committed to fairness and integrity, but we don't respond to coercion or viral pressure tactics." The internet lit up. Sierra and Simone sat on the hotel bed, watching TikToks of people mocking the statement. One showed a fake CJZTIEO trying to staple dollar bills back into an unplugged ATM machine labeled Sky North. Sierra giggled, but Simone stayed quiet. "Grandma's not going to let this go, is she?" she asked. Sierra shook her head. "Would you?" "No," Simone said, "but I'd be scared." Sierra nodded slowly. "I think she is scared, just not in the way they think." That night, Odessa received a call from an unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again and again. Then a text came through FAA Administrator Darla Reyes. "We need to meet in person tomorrow. You choose location." Odessa stared at the message, then walked over to her bookshelf, pulled down a small, dust-covered binder, Equity Emergency Playbook. She wrote one sentence in the margins. Day 2. They finally admit the system matters. At FAA headquarters the next morning, Odessa sat across from Darla Reyes and 2 policy heads. No lawyers, no press, just people who'd worked in the system long enough to know it was rotting from inside. Darla leaned forward. You've turned the spotlight onto something we ignored for years. You built it, you warned us, and now you've shown us what happens when it's not followed. Odessa didn't smile. She just opened a folder and slid over a document labeled Phase 2 Crew Conduct Transparency Index. This goes beyond investment ratings, she said. It's time airlines are scored the way students are graded on conduct. Darla flipped through the proposal. What's this clause? She asked. Retroactive score degradation? Odessa nodded. For every verified incident in the last 5 years that was covered up, minimized, or denied, each drops your score by 2.4 points. We don't just punish future violations, we clear the backlog. And if the airlines refuse, Odessa folded her hands. Then the investors will, and the airports will, and the international regulators already watching from London to Sydney will move without waiting. Darla looked down at the folder. This will change everything. Odessa finally smiled. That's the point. By evening, 5 more airlines had signed early access letters to the new passenger equity framework. 2 banks publicly endorsed the rating recalibration. One insurer, Eastern Horizon Capital, announced they would no longer underwrite any flight operations with a fair Sky Ethics score under 70. Sky North's was currently at 36. Their stock dropped 11 INUA. Inside a dimly lit crisis war room, Craig Halden stared at a blank document on his laptop. We need a statement, his communications director said softly. Craig tapped the keyboard, then stopped. What the hell do you even say to someone who just dismantled your company with one report? No one answered. Outside, the media vans lined up. Inside, the system reset had already begun. And somewhere across town, in a quiet hotel room, Simone climbed into bed beside Sierra. She's really doing it, she whispered. Sierra nodded. She's rewriting the rules. Odessa, in the next room, heard them through the thin wall. Her eyes welled up, but she didn't let the tears fall. She simply whispered to herself, "Let the skies be fair again." The next morning, the world woke up to a headline that stopped people mid-sip. FAA confirms industry ethics probe. Passenger equity framework. Now mandatory for federal compliance. The announcement wasn't just about Odessa Caldwell anymore. This was bigger, systemic, structural. Airlines weren't just dealing with a PR crisis. They were dealing with a regime change. And at the center of it stood a grandmother who hadn't raised her voice once. At Sky North headquarters, panic settled into something worse. Silence. Departments were told not to speak to press. Employees were instructed to scrub mentions of internal complaints. HR teams were working overtime to figure out how many unresolved racial discrimination reports might now be used to drag their ethics score even lower. Inside the legal wing, a wall of whiteboards tracked every clause in Odessa's framework. Craig Halden stared at a flashing red box. Retroactive score degradation. Pending evaluation of 74 incidents. What happens if we drop below 30? He asked, voice hoarse. One of the analysts spoke up quietly. Then we lose our route certifications in Canada and the EU. FAA flags us for ethical non-compliance. Insurance premiums quadruple. Credit access halts entirely. He didn't reply. At the Bayview Institute, Odessa sat calmly at a policy round table. "You've triggered a full recalibration," said Professor Elaine Chambers. "And not just in the US. International unions are watching." Odessa nodded. They were always watching, just waiting for someone to make the first irreversible move. "Are you prepared for the retaliation?" Odessa looked around the table. "They already slapped my granddaughters in public." "What's left?" someone murmured. "They'll go after your history, discredit the ledger, paint you as a relic." Odessa smiled. "Let them. I wrote every clause in that system with independent third-party validation. For every attack, there's a timestamp." Meanwhile, at News One Global, anchors prepared for a live sit-down interview with Simone and Sierra Caldwell. It wasn't Odessa's idea. It was the girls'. Sierra had said, "If they hear from us, maybe they'll stop saying she overreacted," Simone added. "And maybe they'll believe this wasn't just about one slap." The cameras rolled. The interviewer smiled. "Can you tell us what happened on that flight?" Sierra looked down, then up. "It wasn't just the slap. It was the way she looked at us, like we didn't belong there. Like the seat wasn't really ours," Simone added. "And when we said we did belong," she laughed. "Like it was funny." "And now?" the interviewer asked softly. Sierra looked directly into the camera. "Now they know who we are." The segment aired in over 70 countries. Clips went viral again. But this time, not of violence, of resolve. Odessa didn't need to say a word. At FAA headquarters, Administrator Darla Reyes held a joint press briefing. Effective immediately. All commercial passenger airlines operating within U.S. airspace must comply with the Passenger Equity Framework. Failure to maintain a minimum ethics score of 60 will trigger automatic audits and potential suspension of route rights. This is not optional. This is the future. The news rippled across the industry. Stock analysts called it the ethics reckoning. Passengers started asking airlines for their fair sky scores before booking flights. One video showed a man at the check-in desk asking, "Wait, what's your ethics rating again?" "Because I'm not flying with anyone under 70. I got kids with me." By day 3, 5 major airlines signed the full passenger equity charter. Sky North still hadn't. Instead, they issued a second press statement. "We remain committed to fairness, but reserve our right to challenge unethical mandates imposed by private entities acting outside legislative authority." It backfired instantly. Within hours, screenshots surfaced from former Sky North employees. Internal memos denying bias claims. Whistleblower complaints ignored. DEI proposals shut down without discussion. Someone even leaked a call recording of a senior exec saying, "We'll sign it when hell freezes over." Odessa didn't comment. She didn't need to. The system had already begun to eat its own. In a closed-door Senate Ethics Committee hearing, Odessa sat across from several skeptical lawmakers. One leaned in. "Caldwell, are you suggesting private industry systems should dictate federal aviation policy?" Odessa answered, voice steady. "No, Senator. I'm saying your federal aviation policy failed to protect passengers from industry abuse. So, we built a system that would." Another senator asked, "And what gives you the authority?" Odessa replied without blinking. "The results. When 5 airlines raise standards, 2 banks freeze unethical access, and the public demands better. That's not power. That's accountability." The room fell quiet. Later that evening in her hotel suite, Odessa took a call. It was Craig Holden. He sounded tired, hollow. "I want to meet," he said. "Not on camera, not with lawyers, just you and me." Odessa hesitated. Why? Because I have daughters too, he said, and I think I just learned what it means to be ashamed of myself. There was a long pause. Odessa answered quietly. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., no cameras, no excuses. The next morning they met in a quiet room at the Federal Ethics Mediation Center. Craig sat down, hands trembling slightly. I didn't know who you were, he started. Odessa replied. That's exactly the problem. He swallowed hard. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a path forward. Something we can do. Publicly. Odessa slid a document across the table. It was titled, The Fair Sky Redemption Protocol. Terms for Public Industry Rehabilitation. I don't want revenge, she said. I want prevention. Craig stared at the paper. You're offering me a second chance? Tupo, she said. I'm offering your passengers one. Whether you earn it is up to you. He nodded slowly. I'll sign. Odessa stood. Then we begin tomorrow. By the end of the week, Sky North became the last of the top 7 carriers to sign the charter. They held a press conference, not to defend themselves, but to announce sweeping reforms. A full internal audit of historical complaints, public publishing of monthly ethics scores, on-board reporting tools for passengers, mandatory retraining for all flight crew, and a $50 million donation to fund the Passenger Dignity Education Initiative. The world didn't cheer. It watched. But for Odessa, it wasn't about applause. It was about the silence afterward. That stillness when justice, at last, feels like a full breath. Simone hugged her tightly that night. You did it, Grandma. Odessa smiled softly. No, baby, we did. And far above them, planes crossed the night sky. Still flying, but no longer unchecked. 3 days after Sky North signed the charter, a quiet ripple turned into a wave. The Wall Street Observer ran the headline first. Fair Sky Ledger ratings go public. Investors begin divesting from low-scoring airlines. And just like that, what began as a moral reckoning became a financial one. By 11 o'clock a.m., $400 to $112 million had been pulled from 3 major airlines, whose ethics scores dropped below 60. By 2 o'clock p.m., 2 investment consortia announced they would only back transportation companies compliant with the Passenger Equity Framework. And by nightfall, Black Flag Clause 4.3, the clause Odessa had written 12 years ago, was invoked in full. It froze nearly $940 million in revolving credit lines. The media dubbed it the ethics freeze. But Odessa Caldwell didn't call it that. She called it maintenance. Meanwhile, Sierra and Simone were quietly ushered out of the spotlight. Odessa had seen the early signs, comment sections turning from support to scrutiny. She's exploiting those girls for media gain. They're teenagers. This is too much for the power of them. So Odessa pulled them back. Not because the critics were right, but because the girls deserved a normal Wednesday more than they needed another headline. She handed them phones, turned off press notifications, and told them, they already saw your strength. Now go be kids again. That night, the girls stayed up late watching cartoons. No hashtags, no trending tags, just popcorn. Inside the FAA, a war was brewing. Not against Odessa. Against the silence. For years, the agency had quietly let airlines regulate themselves, evaluating complaints in-house, running DEI initiatives as optional side projects. But now the world was watching. Internal emails showed disagreements on how to proceed. Some senior officials wanted to endorse Fair Sky fully. Others wanted to audit it. One director wrote, "It's either us or them. If we don't lead the ethics framework, private systems will. But the truth was, Fair Sky Ledger wasn't just a system anymore. It had become a standard. And Odessa? She had become something else entirely. Unavoidable. In a quiet Washington restaurant, Odessa met with Marlene Zhu, executive chair of Trans-Allied Holdings, a multinational investment body with over 200 Bausbillers under management. "I'll be brief," Marlene said, setting down a leather folder. "We're pulling $1 million from Air Nova and transferring our portfolio to certified carriers." Odessa blinked. "That's fast." Marlene leaned in. "Ethics is the new capital, and we're not in the business of betting on instability." Then she paused. "But I want to go further." Odessa raised an eyebrow. Marlene continued. "We want to partner with Fair Sky, fund expansion, make it a global system." Odessa didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, "I built Fair Sky so we wouldn't need private leverage to be treated with basic dignity, not to sell it off." Marlene smiled. "Not a buyout. A partnership. You stay in control." Odessa looked at the folder again. The first page read, "Proposal, International Passenger Ethics Accord." She closed the folder. "I'll consider it, but on one condition. Name it. You don't get to shape the rules. You follow them, just like everyone else." Marlene nodded. "Deal." The next morning, a notification came across Fair Sky's internal dashboard. New entry request, international certification interest, 21 carriers. Odessa stared at the screen. In 12 years, no one had asked for international implementation. Now, 21 carriers from 4 continents wanted in. She clicked accept all, then walked to the window. The sun was just breaking over the skyline, and in that moment, it hit her. This isn't about what they did to us anymore. It's about what we do for those after us. Back at Sky North, a different meeting was taking place. Craig Halden stood before his board, flanked by a new chief ethics officer and a visibly uncomfortable legal team. "I've called this session to announce a formal apology," he began. "To every passenger we failed, and to the Caldwell family, whose pain forced us to confront what we refused to see." He turned to the screen behind him. It showed Sky North's updated passenger dignity plan. The room stayed silent as he went through the points. An independent ethics review board, real-time passenger dignity feedback via mobile apps, a standing seat for a passenger advocate on all major flight routes. One board member whispered, "This is a complete overhaul." Craig replied, "It's a start." And for once, no one argued. On the news that night, a familiar voice spoke on a podcast. Odessa Caldwell didn't destroy the airline industry. She reminded it of its obligations. She didn't cancel anyone. She calibrated a system. The voice belonged to Asha Ramani, a journalist once blacklisted for investigating discrimination at national carriers. Her podcast now hit number 3 on the global charts. The name of the episode, "Slap Heard Around the Skies." Meanwhile, Odessa returned to her garden. No press, no podium, just roses. She pruned in silence, careful with the roots, gentle with the thorns. Sierra came outside, wiping her hands on a napkin. "We just saw you on TikTok. You're in a remix with Michelle Obama." Odessa laughed. "What's a remix?" Simone popped her head out. "It means you're a meme now. You've got theme music and everything." Odessa shook her head. Good Lord. But she was smiling because she knew something they didn't. The work wasn't about noise. It was about seeds. And they were finally blooming. Across the country, parents began asking their kids what airline they'd flown on for field trips. Teachers started checking ethics scores before booking flights. Veterans groups requested protections in flight policies, and a bill was drafted in Congress to explore mandatory ethics certification for all public transit systems. Odessa didn't appear at the hearing. She didn't need to. Her name was in the footnotes of every clause. And when a reporter asked if she'd ever go public with Fair Sky, Odessa replied, "Fair Sky was never meant to make me rich. It was meant to keep us human." The reporter asked, "Do you think they'll forget what started it all?" Odessa smiled. "Only if they forget how it felt to be invisible." At 8:17 a.m. on a foggy Tuesday, Odessa Caldwell's name appeared on a Senate agenda. Item 4B. Proposed national integration of the passenger equity framework. It was the first time in 27 years that a civilian-led system, one not created by a government agency, was being considered for federal standardization across U.S. transportation sectors. Odessa didn't attend the hearing. She wasn't avoiding the spotlight. She was avoiding distraction. She knew how the system worked. The moment they made her the center of the story, they'd bury the system itself. So while senators debated, Odessa was in a conference room at the Center for Systems Ethics, sitting with her sleeves rolled up and her glasses halfway down her nose, reviewing a 92-page draft, Operational Readiness Criteria for Equity-Based Airspace Clearance. "This is dense," said Caleb Dwyer, the former CTO of Air Fleet Logistics, who now worked with Odessa's team. "Good," Odessa replied. "Systems should be dense. Being fair isn't about slogans. It's about infrastructure." Caleb smirked. "You know the FAA's gonna fight this." "I know," she said, turning the page. "They've been fighting gravity too. It's not going well for them either." Back in D.C., the Senate hearing had turned surprisingly bipartisan. Senator Ramirez of California spoke first. "My constituents include immigrants, seniors, veterans, and students. They all fly. They all deserve protection." Then a Republican from Ohio surprised the room. "I wasn't sold on this at first. Thought it was corporate overreach. But then my daughter told me about what happened to those girls, Simone and Sierra, and she asked, 'Dad, would they have slapped me too?'" I couldn't answer her. Silence fell. It wasn't the most eloquent speech, but it hit home. A vote was called, and in an 18-2 decision, the motion passed. Begin feasibility study to adopt the passenger equity framework as national baseline policy for federally certified carriers. It wasn't a law yet, but it was no longer just Odessa's fight. It belonged to the system now. By Wednesday, word had spread. News outlets ran with headlines like, "Slap Sparks Senate Shakeup, From Garden to Government, The Odessa Effect, The New Gold Standard, Ethics as Airspace Currency." At the Bayview Institute, where Fair Sky was headquartered, emails flooded in from organizations wanting to license the scoring system. Some were small bus lines. Others were international cruise companies. Odessa's assistant came in, overwhelmed. "We just got a request from the UN Transport Equity Division." Odessa didn't look up from her notepad. "Tell them we'll send the API documentation, but the score parameters don't change, no matter how global this gets." Her assistant blinked. "You're not going to negotiate?" Odessa finally looked up. Dignity isn't a variable. Meanwhile, Simone and Sierra were being approached again by every brand imaginable. One makeup company wanted them for a Brave Beauty campaign. A luxury bag brand offered a 6-figure sponsorship. Odessa sat them down that evening over pasta and said, "You don't owe the world anything right now." Sierra hesitated. "But wouldn't it be powerful if we used our platform?" Odessa smiled. "It would, but powerful doesn't always mean healthy." Simone asked. What would you do? Odessa leaned back. I'd journal. I'd go quiet. I'd remember what happened, not just what it looked like. They nodded. Then Simone whispered, We could write. Odessa raised an eyebrow. Write? Yeah, like a story. Not for the news, just to tell it how we lived it. Odessa exhaled slowly. Now that's power. By Friday, the first outlines of what would become the Passenger Equity Act were drafted. Lawyers from Fairsky collaborated with Senate aides to ensure protections were enforceable, not just performative. Clause 2.1 required airlines to submit quarterly dignity compliance reports. Clause 4.4 made ethics scores accessible via federal booking platforms. Clause 6.2 allowed passengers to challenge discriminatory treatment via a unified complaint pipeline with real-time case visibility. One senator called it the most concrete advancement in consumer air travel rights in 3 decades. But Odessa saw it differently. To her, it was long overdue maintenance. That night, Craig Halden, the CEO of Sky North, sat on a panel hosted by The Atlantic. He looked different, thinner, more measured. The moderator asked, If you could go back to that day, what would you do differently? Craig didn't blink. I'd have fired myself that morning before Odessa had to do it for me. The moderator leaned in. Do you think Sky North will survive this? Craig shrugged. It's not about us surviving. It's about whether we've learned enough to deserve survival. A pause. Then, and for what it's worth, I thank her. Because she didn't destroy us. She forced us to become something we weren't brave enough to imagine. Back at home, Odessa received a simple package in the mail. No return address. Inside, a printed photo. It showed a flight crew, all smiles, standing next to a young girl in a wheelchair and her mother. On the back was a handwritten note. First time we weren't told to pre-board through the service door. Thank you for making us visible. Odessa stared at it for a long time. Then she walked to her office, opened a drawer, and slid the photo in. She had a section labeled before and after. It was almost full now. Late that night, she stood at her window, looking out over the city. Sierra and Simone were asleep. The world was noisy again. Podcasts, news segments, hashtags. But she wasn't listening to any of it. Instead, she pulled out her phone and typed a message to herself. Don't get addicted to being right. Stay addicted to doing right. She paused, then added, Let systems serve people, not reputations. She saved the note and smiled. Because tomorrow would bring another wave of meetings, another barrage of interviews, another headline. But tonight, she was just a grandmother, one who planted seeds. And finally, saw them grow. Odessa woke before dawn again, drawn to her laptop by an email with the subject line, UN Transport Equity Division, request for immediate integration. She'd expected interest, but not this early. She clicked open the message, skimmed the diplomatic tone, then closed her eyes for a moment. 4 continents now wanted Fairsky's passenger equity framework. 12 carriers had already applied for certification. 21 more were in the queue. Cruise lines, bus firms, even rail networks were asking for guidelines. It was surreal. A private system she had built 10 years ago, quietly fermenting behind the scenes, was now being used to shape policies from New York to Nairobi. She hit reply all and typed, We'll send API docs and implementation parameters by end of day. No adjustments to core ethics metric. Protocol 4.3 remains universal. Then she hit send and returned to her tea, letting the steam wake her senses. Soon enough, the world would merge around a simple principle. Dignity can't be optional. Later that morning, a small group of executives from Eurosky Holdings gathered in Barcelona. They'd been flying under a provisional FareSky rating of 68, just above the US minimum. Their CEO, Inés Delgado, pushed up her glasses as the statistics scrolled on a conference room screen. 14 confirmed passenger discrimination incidents in the last 24 months. 9 internal complaints inadequately addressed. A base ethics rating of 52.8, post-retroactive degradation. Not enough, Inés said. We need to sign the full charter, effective immediately. Her CFO, Luca Romano, frowned. But our North American routes, those airlines haven't fully complied yet. If we move too quickly, they'll outcompete us on pricing. Inés shook her head. If we don't lead, someone else will. Listen, TransAllied just pulled $100 million from Air Nova. They're going to fund our expansion if we commit now. This is our moment. Luca sighed. Fine, I'll draft the board resolution. Inés nodded, turning to her team. Let's get on the platform. By month's end, Eurosky will be the first European carrier to publish real-time ethics updates. Across the Pacific, in Sydney, executives from Outback Airways huddled around a video feed that showed Odessa speaking quietly at a policy roundtable 2 days ago. They'd been hesitant when FareSky first launched. But now, as Australia prepared for the Asia-Pacific Sustainable Transport Summit, they couldn't afford to lag. Their head of innovation, Maddie Liu, tapped her pen on the table. Our score is 61. That's barely compliant. Morningstar just downgraded us. Another officer, Tariq Mahmood, flipped through internal memos. Board wants a mandatory ethics officer on every flight crew team. They say it's overkill. Maddie frowned. They want us to add personnel? That's expensive. Tariq shrugged. But if we don't, our routes to Singapore and Tokyo will be flagged. We lose code share agreements. The CEO, Grace Yoon, sighed and leaned back. Fine, let's hire 2 onboard compliance officers as pilots in training. They can monitor passenger feedback and get our IT to integrate FareSky's API before next quarter. Back in San Francisco, Odessa received a text from Asha Ramani, the journalist who'd popularized slap herd around the skies. Her message read, "We're doing a long form on how FareSky is reshaping transportation globally. Need a few quotes. Can you talk tomorrow?" Odessa paused. She had interviewed once before, long ago, but now she wanted to protect her privacy. She replied, "Send me your questions. I'll respond in writing." Asha typed almost immediately. 1. Do you ever worry you've gone too far? 2. What's next? 3. How do you keep humble when the world is chasing you? Odessa set the phone aside and took a deep breath. She wasn't sure how to answer too far, but she'd try later. Right now, she had a dinner with Darla Reyes to prepare. She'd be moderating a session on global ethics in transit with 5 transport ministers from Canada, Germany, Kenya, Brazil, and India. That afternoon, Simone and Sierra splashed into the hotel pool. For a moment, the world felt distant. No hashtags, no headlines, just laughter and chlorine. "Do you think they'll ever forget us?" Simone asked, hovering on a floaty. Sierra floated next to her. "I don't know, but I hope not. If they forget the reason all this started." Simone nodded. "Grandma says it's not about being famous. It's about being heard." Sierra held out her hand. "Race you to the shallow end?" They dove under together, the cool water swallowing their laughter. For now, it was enough. Early evening found Odessa at the Bayview Institute, addressing a crowd of transport ministers and ethics officers. She stood before a semicircle of unfamiliar faces. "Thank you all for joining," she began, voice steady. When I built Fairsky, I imagined it as a tool for airlines. No, for all passenger carriers, to ensure every traveler received basic dignity. What started as a dozen lines of code has grown into a global standard. But the true measure of success isn't in the number of signatories. It's in the everyday journeys of travelers. She clicked her remote and a slide appeared, a photograph of a young mother, her wheelchair-bound son beside her, both smiling in an airport terminal. The caption read, "First time we boarded without having to pre-board." Often, Odessa continued, the smallest gestures, like allowing a mother to board normally, can reshape an entire policy. Dignity doesn't come from headlines. It comes from moments like these. A transport minister from Kenya, Rashida Odinga, spoke up. "Your system has already made an impact. Our bus lines are talking about adopting a similar rating. How do we scale this across different modes of transit?" Odessa leaned forward. The principles are the same: real-time feedback, transparent reporting, and accountability. Whether you're running a ferry or a bullet train, you need metrics that passengers trust and that investors finance. Another minister from Brazil, Joaquim Alves, asked, "How do we handle cultural differences? What dignifies a passenger in Tokyo may not be the same in Sao Paulo." Odessa nodded. "We designed Fairsky's API to be customizable. Local stakeholders set the weightings, but the baseline, no racial profiling, no undue delays, no humiliating screenings, is universal. Those are non-negotiables." They spent the next hour discussing implementation timetables, pilot programs, and resource sharing. Whenever a question drifted toward politics, Odessa steered it back to process. Don't debate whether dignity is important. Prove it with data. That night, Odessa returned to her garden at the Grantham. She'd brought home another photograph, this time of a group of elderly passengers who'd organized a petition after witnessing a wheelchair user being forced to wait in line. She placed the new image next to the others in her before and after drawer, testimony that echoed across demographics. Sierra and Simone stepped out, toweling off. Sierra held up her tablet. "Grandma, look, we got a note from a teacher in Chicago. She says she started a fair travel club at her school." Simone beamed. "Kids are teaching kids." Odessa smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "That's exactly how it should work." They stood there, 3 generations under the soft glow of the garden lamps. The quiet night air felt full of possibility, of memory, of something that felt like hope. Simone yawned. "Can we do this again tomorrow?" Odessa reached down and hugged them both. "We will. Every day." The following morning, the FAA's website went live with a new landing page. Track your airline's ethics score here. Passengers clicking on the tool found. A heat map showing regional compliance. Digital ethics badges next to each carrier's logo. A filter allowing travelers to choose flights based on dignity metrics. Within hours, travel forums exploded. Never flying United again. Look at their 58 rating. My grandma's mobility issues finally matter. Thank you, Fairsky. Just booked Alaska Air 72 on ethics scale. Every post carried a link to the Fairsky portal. And in the corner of the page, a small icon read, "Powered by Passenger Equity Framework. Founded by O. Caldwell." As Odessa read through notifications on her phone, Sierra climbed onto her lap. "Grandma, does this ever feel scary?" Odessa hugged her tightly. "Sometimes. But if you stand for what's right, sometimes you have to be a little scared." Sierra pressed her cheek against Odessa's. "I want to be brave like you." Odessa closed her eyes. "You already are." Outside, A jet bank, the area where planes idled before takeoff, lit up the dawn sky. Planes taxied toward the runway. Their passengers would board under a new promise: to be seen, to be heard, to be treated with respect. And for Odessa Caldwell, this was just the beginning. Odessa's phone buzzed with a news alert just as the cabin lights flipped on for boarding hours later. FAA announces mandatory passenger equity framework for all U.S. carriers. In a brief but definitive statement, the FAA declared that any airline wishing to operate or expand routes, even domestic charters, would now need to maintain a passenger equity score of at least 65. Failure to comply meant losing access to federal grants, route approvals, and code share privileges. Within minutes, travel apps updated to display each carrier's ethics rating alongside price and travel time. Social feeds branched into two camps: those celebrating a new era of accountability and those accusing the government of overreach. But most casual travelers were simply curious. Would their next ticket reflect this new dignity score? At Denver International's Gate C14, a retired schoolteacher tapped through the airline list on her tablet. She raised an eyebrow at the 58 rating next to her usual preference, then closed the app and switched her booking to a different carrier with a 72. Beside her, a young dad asked the gate agent, "Is Flyer Air really a 62? My daughter's on chemo. Can I trust them with her boarding process?" The agent offered only a polite shrug, pointing out where to find grievance reporting if needed. A week ago, none of this would have made sense. Now passengers like them navigated an entirely new priority: ethics first. At Sky North's Crisis Center, the impact hit like a wave. Their current score hovered at 59 after retroactive charges. The station manager in Denver saw 3 open seats in first class go unclaimed, despite a last-minute fare drop. A local travel blogger tweeted, "Sky North stuck in the ethics penalty box, and it's 2025, folks." Meanwhile, Horizon Air, who'd quietly signed the charter 2 days earlier, ran a temporary promotion. Their ethics badge flashed green on every ad. Fly Horizon Air, score 74. Travel with dignity. Ticket sales spiked by 18% in just 24 hours. Back in Washington, D.C., the FAA held a press briefing. Administrator Darla Reyes summarized the metrics. Initial reviews show 75% of major carriers have already committed. Gun the certification process. We expect a full industry transition within 90 days. This is not a passing trend. Passenger dignity is now integral to financial and regulatory approval in U.S. airspace. Reporters peppered her with questions about enforcement. Darla confirmed that ethics audits would be unannounced and the consumer complaints would feed directly into each airline's public compliance dashboard. As Odessa watched clips of the briefing from her home office, she allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. This was exactly the tipping point she'd designed for when honoring dignity ceased to be a niche debate and became part of mainstream decision-making. Around the country, union representatives and HR teams scrambled to distribute crew conduct training modules and passenger interaction guidelines to cabin staff. Flight attendants who once joked about routing problem passengers to back seats now had to review new scripts on transparency and apology protocols. Snooty first-class perks were being re-evaluated through a new lens. Inclusion. That evening, Sierra and Simone texted Odessa excitedly. "We just saw a viral video. 2 pilots gave up their jump seats so a wheelchair user could avoid the jet bridge. They said, 'That's worth more than our coffee gift cards.'" Simone added, airport staff cheering. "It's kind of nice to see people clap for something real." Odessa folded her newspaper and closed her laptop. "Let systems serve people, not reputations," she'd written months ago. Now, as the circuit breakers flipped across the industry, she knew those words were proving true. And in the quiet that followed the headlines, a new rhythm took hold. One where every boarding pass carried not just a destination, but a promise of respect. By the time Sierra and Simone arrived at Dallas-Fort Worth 6 months later, neither of them felt a flutter of anxiety. That was new. As they wheeled their suitcases into the Sky North first-class lounge, a young flight attendant named Priya checked their boarding passes with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, Miss Caldwell. Welcome back," Priya said, handing the girls their tickets. No extra scrutiny, no perfunctory glances, just informational. "Boarding will start at 3:15. Sierra and Simone exchanged a quick grin. It felt striking, almost surreal, that they'd gone from being treated like interlopers to being recognized by name. They settled into the plush chairs, unwrapped a snack plate with fruit and cheese, and watched as other travelers, families, business people, retirees, milled around peacefully. At exactly 3:15, Priya reappeared. "Ladies, Flight 842 is now boarding. You're welcome to go first." She gestured to the younger daughter, Simone, as if she'd truly been expecting them. On the jet bridge, Simone paused to adjust her backpack. Even that felt different. No side-eye or open suspicion. Instead, a fellow passenger in economy leaned over and said, "Thanks for paving the way. My niece has cerebral palsy. I know boarding used to be a nightmare." Simone simply nodded, happy to see things changing. When they stepped into the cabin, every seatbelt buckle and linen bib felt like a small triumph. The seatbelt extension came without question. The overhead bins opened without fuss. A flight attendant brought both girls water immediately. No need to ask. Once seated, Sierra unzipped her laptop case. A minute later, the chief purser, a middle-aged woman with gentle eyes, came by. "I just wanted to introduce myself," she said. "I'm Dana. The airline wants to thank you and your grandmother for helping us see where we went wrong. We're holding a video training tonight on inclusive service protocols, and I hope you'll join us. No cameras, just a Q&A if you feel like it." Sierra nodded, blinking back emotion. "Thank you. That means a lot." Below them, a group of flight attendants was already practicing a new greeting script over headsets. Phrases designed to convey respect rather than code phrases meant to expedite a passenger off the plane. One attendant said, "Good afternoon. How can I make your flight comfortable today?" Rather than, "You're in row 5L, right?" As the engine started, Simone pressed play on her tablet. A short documentary clip about FairSky's global adoption. She watched scenes of bus lines in Nairobi and ferries in Amsterdam receiving ethics badges, then smiled at her sister. "Look at this. Grandma's remarks in Berlin. It's in 3 languages now." Sierra leaned over. "She told me the other day, real change only happens when they can't ignore your existence anymore. I think today they can't." Simone nodded. "I can't wait to tell her." When the captain's voice came over the PA. "Welcome aboard Flight 842 to San Francisco. Proud to serve you with dignity today." Simone closed her eyes, letting go of the last 6 months. Once, she'd believed that first class was off limits. Now, it was no longer a gilded cage, but a place where respect was the real upgrade. Outside, the airport tarmac faded beneath them. Inside, Sierra and Simone leaned in, shoulders touching. They remembered the slap, the politics, the freezes, the Senate hearings, and realized how far they'd collectively traveled. As the plane climbed through clear sky, Simone whispered, "We made it happen." Sierra grinned. "Yeah, we did." The first green lights of dawn spilled into the terminals of 6 major airports: Atlanta, Chicago, O'Hare, Dallas-Fort Worth, Los Angeles, New York, JFK, and Seattle, Tacoma. In each, a pilot on the tarmac saw a new icon pop up on her tablet. Passenger Ethics Flag, PEF active, score 78. In the gate lounges, flight attendants checked their tablets and noticed next to their credentials a small colored dot indicating their provisional ethics score for the day. At Atlanta Hartsfield, a veteran attendant named Marisol Torres paused before boarding started. Her PEF read 92, green. She closed her eyes for a second, remembering how last year her score would have been invisible. She'd been untracked in the old system. Now, when she greeted a passenger in a wheelchair, her smile felt personal, rewarded by the interface. Behind her, an older businessman glanced at his own PEF, an amber 65. He furrowed his brow, but nodded at Marisol's greeting before wheeling toward the aircraft. Up in the sky, news tickers began reporting the first metrics from the 6 airports. Total flights issued ethics scores: 328 average passenger compliance, 89 crew-patient interaction commendations, 47 in first shift. Ethics violation alerts, 5 codes auto-generated. Among those 5 was code PETTF 407, tagged to a gate agent, who had scolded a young black father for asking to board early with his toddler. Despite clear medical documentation for the child's condition, an AI-backed review scanned surveillance footage and passenger testimony, assigning that agent a provisional violation. By noon, an HR message asked her to review a training module on non-discriminatory boarding protocols. In the FAA building, Administrator Darla Reyes watched these early reports with satisfaction. On a large screen, she saw a graph comparing last month's absent compliance data, when ethics was purely voluntary, against today's live PEF scores. The shift was dramatic. Airlines that had resisted now scrambled to update policies. Within 48 hours, Darla murmured, "We'll see which carriers truly internalize this." Meanwhile, Global Green Capital, an international ESG fund, sent a memo to its investors. Effective next quarter, airline valuations will include passenger ethics flag scores as 15% of our weighting criteria. Financial analysts buzzed. Suddenly, ethics scores weren't just for show. A dip in PEF from 85 to 7 could knock a carrier's stock down by 3 to 5%. Social media users already posted images of airline logos overlaid with their PEF ranges. Green, 80 to 100. Yellow, 60 to 79. Red, 60. Back in the terminals, passengers noticed subtle changes encouraged by the flag system. When a family with a service dog boarded, ground staff used a discreet compassion protocol to fast-track them. Their PEF readout glowed brighter on their boarding passes. Elsewhere, travelers downloaded a new mobile app to see real-time ethics updates. Delayed flights now displayed reasons like PEF audit in progress instead of mechanical issues, signaling that passenger treatment could prompt a spot check. By late afternoon, storylines emerged. Ethics over ease, asked one travel blog, profiling an upset passenger at Chicago O'Hare, whose request for a pre-boarding seat was initially denied until another staffer intervened, citing a newly published PEF guideline. Crew commendation, Seattle Flight 442, highlighted an attendant who used the onboard PEF tablet to flag a fellow passenger's medical needs, allowing paramedics to meet the flight on arrival. As sunset tinted the airport windows orange, Odessa Caldwell sat in her San Francisco office, reviewing the first full-day PEF analytics. 6 airports, hundreds of flights, tens of thousands of data points. Her shoulders relaxed at the knowledge that a system designed to protect dignity had finally moved from policy to practice. She typed a quick note to her team, phased the on-schedule, expand to 12 hubs by quarter's end. Prepare incident training videos based on today's violations. Then she paused and smiled. The groundswell of real-time accountability had begun, and soon enough, every boarding pass would carry not just a destination, but a promise to be seen, to be valued, to be treated with respect. 6 months later, Sierra and Simone sat in the Sky North first-class lounge at Dallas-Fort Worth, waiting for their connecting flight. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee. Nothing like the tension they recalled from their first journey. They were older now. Sierra had just started her freshman year of high school, and Simone was finishing middle school. They'd both grown an inch or two, and their voices carried a confidence that hadn't been there before. When the lounge attendant Priya greeted them by name, Simone smiled. "Thanks for having us again, Priya," she said. "Feels normal." Priya nodded. "It is now. Have a snack before boarding? Flight 7 or 12 should start in about 15 minutes. As Simone poured orange juice, Sierra glanced at the departure board. Beside their flight number was a small green icon, PEF 82. Sierra thought of how daunting it once felt just to sit in first class. Now she saw families with children, seniors with canes, even a service dog's harness stroll past. Each passenger treated with the same understated dignity. When boarding began, they moved forward. A young mother in a wheelchair approached the gate agent next to them. As the staff scanned her boarding pass, the agent offered her an aisle chair without being asked. The mother's face lit up, and she mouthed thank you to them before rolling down the jet bridge. Sierra caught Simone's eye. "Did you ever think we'd get here?" Simone shook her head. "Not back then. But Grandma said systems serve people, not reputations." Sierra finished for her. They both laughed softly. Inside the cabin, the chief purser, Dana, stopped by their seats. "Miss Caldwell, good to see you both. Our crew has been updated on your grandmom's work. If there's anything you need, just let me know." Sierra felt a warm glow. "Thank you, really." Dana's kindness wasn't a show. It was the new normal. Pilots and flight attendants wearing a tiny patch on their lapels, indicating their compliance with the passenger equity framework. Even the in-flight magazines carried a sidebar on dignity in air travel with tips for passengers. Once the plane was airborne, Simone unzipped her backpack and pulled out a small notebook, the same kind Grandma Odessa used. She tapped at the first page. "Today, I wasn't afraid to be seen." Sierra watched the clouds drift below. Grandma would be proud. Simone wrote, "We helped change the sky." When the captain's voice came over the intercom, "At Sky North, we commit to serving every passenger with respect and care." Both sisters closed their eyes. It wasn't just lip service. It was an echo of 6 months of policy shifts, Senate hearings, investor pressures, and thousands of passengers demanding better. It was the culmination of one slap, one call, and a system that refused to stay silent. As the jet leveled off, Sierra looked at her sister. "What happens next?" Simone shrugged. "We keep flying, and maybe tell Grandma the sky feels different." Sierra smiled, then leaned her head against the window. "Yeah, it does." Outside, the sun glinted off the wings. Inside, they were no longer invisible. They were evidence that a single act of injustice could spark change, a promise that every boarding pass now held: to be seen, to be valued, to be treated with dignity. If this story changed your perspective on air travel and respect, share it with a friend. Each share helps spread the message of justice. Why It Works encourages sharing, increasing the video's reach.